Hey everyone, welcome to Bill's Mathia. With free agency winding down and the draft starting to ramp up, I wanted to cover my personal philosophy to the draft, which is BPFU, which stands for Best Player for Us. This is definitely a bit contradictory towards a common draft philosophy, which is BPA or Best Player Available. And to start to contrast the difference between BPA and what I would advocate for, which is the BPFU model, I'm going to start off with my fictional hero list going from one to all the way at the bottom. Tom Bombadil, feel free to attack me in the comments. One of the absolute worst fictional heroes in the literary universe. A couple of problems immediately creep up. The first of which is obviously the subjectivity of this, which would be true even with NFL players. But if we actually start introducing some context or nuance into these characters, you see that they do represent a very different set of spaces depending on where you're looking at. And so immediately things start to fall apart with who really is best. And the idea of situational or context based analysis really comes into play. Now, if we want to go into math terms, which of course this series is focused on, we're going to take a look at talent or BPA as this singular point. So this really is your BPA model. If the person has the best talent, they go inside this circle, and that is where you're going to draft. You're going to pick whoever is the best person on the board. And by talent, what we mean is, of course, impact on the field. Now, in the NFL, contracts, common sense, statistical analysis all really points to one thing. The most impactful player on the field will generally be your quarterback. So if NFL teams stuck to a BPA strict draft philosophy, you would see the first round dominated by quarterbacks even more than they currently are, with the simple idea being that even a mediocre quarterback is probably going to provide more value or talent on the field than an elite or even really good player at many other positions. So the BPFU starts to introduce this idea of team needs. So talent is obviously great, but what's going to happen for the team, what's best for them, is certainly important as well. Now, of course, this is for BuffaloRumblings.com, and we want to talk about the Buffalo Bills. So what I've done here is I've started to introduce some of the Buffalo Bills team needs, in my opinion, into this Venn diagram. And if you're worried about this, yes, Venn diagrams are technically mathematical because this introduces the idea of logic and probability. So the closer we get towards this midline, where we get towards the middle of the area, the more likely we are to draft a player. So again, we are looking at circles, but they are really driving more towards probability or math. So for me, I highlighted Josh Allen earlier. Quarterback is not a team need. I think if we picked one in the first round or two, people are going to freak out, and rightfully so, because it just does not really meet that BPFU philosophy. Even though if the Bills had an opportunity, let's say hypothetically they had a top 5 pick, you could land a really impactful player at the quarterback position, but it just doesn't really make sense for the Buffalo Bills. Now, defensive back, I have kind of on the fringe. We do have some wonderful players there, starting with Tre'Davious White. We have all pros talent in Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Kyer Elam, and Christian Benford certainly showed up quite a bit last year. We just added, another safety, starting quality, and everybody knows how much I love Taron Johnson. Tons of defensive backs, but adding depth certainly could have some value. So I'd call that on the fringe. It's not necessarily a team need, but would we be upset to have another talented defensive back? Probably not. But for my purposes, would another wide receiver elite talent be great to have for Josh Allen? 100%. With the loss of Tremaine Edmonds, we really have a huge need for linebacker and offensive line. Absolutely we would. But beyond this idea of team need for position, you also have to go into a more nuanced approach. What specifically are you looking for out of that player? Now, wide receiver is a little bit more straightforward with slot versus outside. With linebacker, we know that the Buffalo Bills do tend to value coverage ability more than run support. But with the offensive line, this is going to be a huge one for us. Power versus finesse. And what I mean by that is it'd be wonderful to have a mauler, somebody who can drive defensive players back a few yards to get a couple of extra yards. But if they're trying to fit in with a line that historically for the Buffalo Bills has been more finesse based, a little bit more speed, strategy there, they're not really going to be the best fit. If 4 players are doing one thing, the 5th player is doing a different thing, it's really not the best use of our fit. I don't think a ton of people are necessarily opposed to this idea, but the BPFU is going to take this idea even further and identify this idea of fit. And for fit considerations, we're adding some additional things which are definitely captured at the combine, but I think are often undervalued by a lot of uh, analysts or fans. Personality, culture, the intangibles are huge for the fit considerations, and definitely don't discount those. I take this idea and liken it to a job interview because that's in reality what it is. If you interview a person, you spend 30 minutes with them during that interview, and you just really can't stand them, you have this personality just does not fit very well. If you can't deal with them for 30 minutes, how are you going to go to work with them day in, day out? Isaiah McKenzie is a wonderful example for the Bills in the past, who really met that personality fit in the locker room, got along great, and because of that, he was easier to work with, easier to slot in, easier to build that chemistry. So while you may have maybe a little bit to desire here in the talent, he does pull harder towards the center, maybe that fit thing. And that's not an insult to Isaiah McKenzie. Now, of course, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's definitely going to be other considerations. So, value. Would you be more likely to take a flyer on somebody who fits the talent aspect in maybe rounds 5 through 7, just because there's not a lot of risk with those draft picks? 100%. Would you maybe take somebody who's not, a team need even, just because they're an extra gamble? What about scarcity of position? Uh, why are punters not drafted a ton? Well, it's because generally speaking, in an NFL season, you're going to need 32 to 35-ish, a couple injury replacements. And in general, there's enough adequate to good punters to go around for every team. So you don't need to, scramble over other teams to try and get that. And certainly there's other more considerations for that. Now, ultimately, the BPFU might add these extra circles that you see here, and you might end up with a Venn diagram that looks more like a flower than anything else. But the idea here is that every aspect you're looking at, the goal is to try and draw towards the center, as you see the arrows are doing here. The more things that a person fits and the more that they pull towards that center, the greater the likelihood that they will fit into the team needs. So even going beyond um, position or other things, when you get to some of these concepts like fit or value or anything else, when you're including the Venn diagram, you might have person one outside, person two inside the circle. All of those factors are definitely going to interplay. And again, this whole video, this whole concept using these Venn diagrams is really just this recognition that BPA is almost a myth. You're really not going to see a team that's drafting purely off of BPA. All of these considerations are factored in at the combine. You see them in how GMs talk and how people are evaluated. This is really what I believe is the true way NFL teams evaluate talent, is that BPFU model. That's all I have for you today. Definitely take a look at buffalorumblings.com. If you liked what you see, like, subscribe, call me in the comments, whatever floats your boat.